In 1943, in the middle of the deadliest war in human history, an American banker boarded a German escort vessel in occupied Europe and sailed freely through Nazi-controlled waters. He was not a prisoner. He was not a spy. He was the president of the Bank for International Settlements, the most secretive financial institution on earth. His name was Thomas McKittrick. He was a Harvard-educated Wall Street banker from St. Louis, Missouri. While American soldiers were dying on battlefields across Europe and the Pacific, this man held meetings with Reichsbank officials in Berlin. He socialized with the CEO of IG Farben, the company that manufactured the gas used in the death camps. He accepted looted Nazi gold into his bank's vaults in Switzerland. Gold stripped from the central banks of conquered nations, gold melted down from the personal possessions of Holocaust victims. And German U-boats received standing orders not to touch the ship that carried him. His bank paid dividends to shareholders in Nazi-occupied countries. It facilitated foreign exchange transactions for the Reichsbank. It provided the financial channel through which Nazi Germany accessed the neutral world's economy, and on its board sat officials from both sides of the war, Allied and Axis central bankers meeting in the same room, managing the same accounts, while their country's soldiers killed each other on battlefields 500 miles away. When the war ended, McKittrick was not arrested. He was not investigated. He was not charged with treason. He was promoted. He became vice president of Chase National Bank. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the documented financial architecture of the Second World War. And it begins not with the man who started the killing, but with the men who financed it into existence. Before we go further, drop where you are watching from in the comments right now. I want to know which countries are following this money trail. And stay to the end, because every name, every dollar, and every transaction in this video is sourced from congressional investigations, Senate hearings, U.S. Army intelligence reports, and the Nuremberg trial archives. Every classroom teaches that World War II began on September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. But the financial machinery that made that invasion possible was switched on 20 years earlier in a palace outside Paris. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles declared Germany solely responsible for the war. The reparations bill came to 132 billion gold marks, roughly $500 billion in today's currency. Germany was stripped of 13% of its territory, 48% of its iron production, and its military was reduced to 100,000 men. John Maynard Keynes resigned from the British delegation in protest. He warned that the demands would destroy Europe. He was ignored. But here's the part that is rarely taught. Britain and France were not demanding reparations because they wanted revenge. They were demanding reparations because they were in debt. The United States had loaned more than $10 billion to the Allied governments during the war. Washington made one thing clear. Those debts would be repaid in full. No forgiveness, no cancellation. Britain offered to cancel everyone else's debt if America canceled Britain's. Washington refused. And so a system was built in which the only way money could move was from Germany westward across Europe and into American banks. If Germany could not pay, nobody could pay. By 1923, Germany had defaulted. France occupied the Ruhr. The government printed money to pay striking workers. The currency collapsed to 4.2 trillion marks to $1. Europe was on the edge of another war, and the United States sent a banker named Charles Dawes to fix it. What Dawes built was a circular money machine, and if you want the full documented story of how it worked, we covered it in detail in a previous video. But here is the essential mechanism. Wall Street lent to Germany. Germany paid reparations to Britain and France. Britain and France repaid their war debts to America. Wall Street lent more to Germany. The circle continued. American banks collected from both ends of the same money going around in a circle. The loans were short-term and callable at any time. Wall Street was guaranteed first position in the queue. If Germany had to choose between paying its bankers and paying its reparations, the bankers came first. A Morgan officer was appointed to supervise the system from inside Berlin. The referee worked for one of the players. And over 130 long-term loans and hundreds of short-term loans poured into Germany from the United States over the next 5 years. Germany received 44.7 billion marks in foreign loans. It paid back 16.8 billion in reparations. The net flow of capital ran toward Germany, not away from it. Wall Street collected interest, commissions, and industrial equity at every stage. Dawes won the Nobel Peace Prize and became vice president. When Wall Street crashed in October 1929, the loans were recalled overnight. German industrial production fell 40%. Unemployment hit 6 million. The golden age was over. And in the wreckage, the Nazi Party went from 2.6% of the vote to 37.3% in 4 years. Hitler was appointed chancellor in January 1933. The financial architecture that was designed to keep the peace had manufactured the conditions for the worst war in history, and the men who built it had already collected their fees. Hitler did not rebuild Germany's military alone. American capital helped, and it did not stop flowing when the swastikas went up. In October 1936, the United States ambassador to Nazi Germany wrote directly to President Roosevelt. His letter contained a sentence that should have changed history. He reported that more than 100 American corporations had subsidiaries or cooperative arrangements operating inside Nazi Germany. Ford's German subsidiary produced military trucks from its Cologne plant. A new truck assembly plant was opened in Berlin in 1938, whose real purpose, according to U.S. Army intelligence, was producing troop transport vehicles for the Wehrmacht. Construction was completed just in time for Hitler's invasion of Czechoslovakia. By 1942, 1 in 3 of the Wehrmacht's 350,000 trucks in service had been built in Ford factories. Ford and General Motors' German affiliates together built nearly 90% of the armored half-track vehicles and more than 70% of the Reich's medium and heavy-duty trucks. These vehicles were described in American intelligence reports as the backbone of the German Army transportation system. A U.S. Army intelligence report dated September 1945 directly accused Ford work of serving as an arsenal of Nazism with the knowledge of the parent company in Dearborn, Michigan. General Motors' Opel division was the largest car maker in Germany. GM's German plants produced thousands of bomber and jet fighter propulsion systems for the Luftwaffe, at the same time that GM's American plants produced aircraft engines for the U.S. Army Air Corps. The same corporation was building engines for both air forces simultaneously. Together, Ford and GM controlled 70% of the German automobile market at the outbreak of war. Both companies retooled their German plants to supply military vehicles used in the invasions of Poland, France, and the Soviet Union. The head of General Motors, James Mooney, received the Grand Cross of the German Eagle from Hitler personally. Standard Oil of New Jersey maintained a partnership with IG Farben, the chemical conglomerate that would later manufacture Zyklon B for the gas chambers and operate factories at Auschwitz using slave labor. Standard Oil sent $2 million to Germany in December 1933 alone and earned $500,000 a year helping produce synthetic fuel, the substance that kept the Wehrmacht's tanks and aircraft operational. Standard Oil also shared critical patents for synthetic rubber and aviation fuel with IG Farben, patents that were withheld from the U.S. military until congressional investigators discovered the arrangement. IBM's German subsidiary, De Homag, provided the punch card technology used by the Nazi regime to conduct the census operations that identified Jews and other targeted groups. Edwin Black documented in IBM and the Holocaust that concentration camps operated dedicated Hollerith departments. SS personnel were trained by IBM technicians. The machines tracked prisoners, cataloged movements, and managed the logistics of mass murder. International Telephone and Telegraph owned significant shares in Focke-Wulf, a German aircraft manufacturer that produced fighter planes for the Luftwaffe. These were the planes that shot down Allied bombers over Germany. ITT maintained and expanded its German investments throughout the war, increasing its stake in German manufacturing even after America had entered the conflict. Chase National Bank, one of the largest banks in America, kept its Paris branch open under Nazi occupation. The branch operated under German oversight and reported growing profits to its Manhattan headquarters throughout the occupation. American money continued to flow through Nazi-controlled financial channels with the knowledge of American bank executives. The total American corporate investment in Nazi Germany at the time the United States entered the war exceeded $450 million. That is roughly $9 billion in today's currency. American capital was embedded in the Nazi war machine at every level, in its trucks, its aircraft, its fuel, its chemicals, its communications technology, and its banking system. But the corporate pipeline was only one channel. There was another, far more powerful, far more secret, and far more protected. A bank in Switzerland with no sign on its door that laundered Nazi gold while American and British bankers sat on its board. The Bank for International Settlements was created in 1930 under the Dawes and Young plans to manage German reparation transfers. It was headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, in a plain building with no sign identifying it. Its board included central bankers from every major nation. During the war, that board included Walther Funk, Hitler's Minister of Economics and President of the Reichsbank. It included Hjalmar Schacht, the man who had secretly financed German rearmament. And it included representatives from the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve. The president, from 1940 to 1946, was Thomas McKittrick, an American, a Harvard man, a Wall Street banker. Under McKittrick, the BIS accepted looted Nazi gold stripped from the central banks of occupied nations, Belgium, the Netherlands, Czechoslovakia. Gold taken from the personal possessions of Holocaust victims, including dental fillings and jewelry, melted down and recast into bars. The BIS received it, processed it, and converted it into usable currency for the Nazi war effort. The mechanism was precise. The Reichsbank would deliver gold bars to the BIS vault in Basel. The BIS would credit the Reichsbank's account. The Reichsbank would use that credit to purchase foreign currency, Swiss francs, Swedish kronor, Portuguese escudos, which could then be used to buy critical war materials from neutral countries. The gold itself never needed to leave Switzerland, only the ownership changed, and the BIS facilitated every transfer without asking where the gold had come from. Emil Puhl, vice president of the Reichsbank and the man directly responsible for processing the looted gold, was a close personal friend of McKittrick. They met regularly in Basel. Puhl later testified at Nuremberg that he had informed McKittrick about the origin of the gold. McKittrick maintained that the bank's policy was neutrality and that he had no obligation to inquire about the source of deposits. McKittrick traveled freely through Nazi-occupied territory during the war. German U-boats received standing orders not to interfere with the vessel carrying him. He held meetings with Reichsbank officials in Berlin, meetings that would have been impossible for any other American citizen during wartime. He exchanged New Year's greetings with Hermann Schmitz, the CEO of IG Farben, whose subsidiary manufactured Zyklon B, and a BIS board member. The correspondence is preserved in the archives. At the BIS, nationals of opposing nations worked side by side in what one observer called courteous harmony. The manager was French. The assistant manager was German, a Nazi party member who signed his correspondence, Heil Hitler, as required by German law. The secretary was Italian. British nationals also worked at the bank. The war that was killing millions did not disturb the quiet efficiency of the institution that was financing it. The American Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor of the CIA, gave McKittrick the codename 644. He passed economic intelligence about German morale and Hitler's strategies to Allen Dulles in Switzerland. He facilitated so-called peace feelers from anti-Nazi German industrialists, conversations that conveniently protected those industrialist assets after the war. McKittrick was simultaneously a banker, an intelligence asset, and a financial intermediary for the Nazi regime. And nobody in Washington stopped him. Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, investigated McKittrick and the BIS during the war. He was horrified by what he found. At the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference, Morgenthau and his chief negotiator, Harry Dexter White, demanded that the BIS be liquidated. The resolution passed. The bank was to be dissolved. It was never dissolved. John Maynard Keynes, representing Britain, intervened to save it. The BIS survived. It operates today from the same building in Basel. It is now the central bank of central banks, coordinating monetary policy for the global financial system. McKittrick left the BIS in 1946. He was not investigated. He was not charged. He became vice president of Chase National Bank, one of the most powerful financial institutions in America. The man who had laundered Nazi gold during the war walked into a corner office on Wall Street after it. If this is your first time on this channel, this is what we do. We follow documented financial mechanisms through the archives and show you how money moved nations. Subscribe if this is your kind of history. The United States government knew. It investigated, and then it stopped. In 1934, the Senate established the Special Committee investigating the munitions industry, chaired by Senator Gerald Nye of North Dakota. The Nye Committee held 93 public hearings over 2 years. It questioned more than 200 witnesses, including J.P. Morgan himself. The committee documented that American bankers had loaned more than $2 billion to Britain and France during the First World War. By 1917, those loans were at risk of default because the Allies were losing. The committee found that bankers had pressured the Wilson administration to enter the war to protect their investment. 117,000 American soldiers died. Morgan's bank had acted as the exclusive purchasing agent for Britain and France, facilitating the purchase of more than $3 billion in war material and collecting commissions on every transaction. When the Allies ran out of credit in 1917, when private investors could no longer safely loan money to insolvent governments, the Wilson administration faced a choice. Either guarantee the Allied loans or watch the war material shipments stop. Since the end of shipments meant Allied defeat and the total loss of Wall Street's $2 billion investment, there was no choice at all. America entered the war. DuPont had earned 1,000% profit margins on gunpowder. Bethlehem Steel had recorded record profits on armaments contracts. Arms manufacturers had lobbied against international disarmament proposals because peace was bad for their balance sheets. The committee called them merchants of death, a phrase that entered the American political vocabulary and has never left. The Nye Committee traced the line from the wartime loans to the Dawes Plan to the collapse to Hitler's rise. Wall Street had financed the war. Wall Street had financed the peace. And Wall Street had collected from every party at every stage while governments carried the risk and citizens paid the cost. The committee's findings led to the Neutrality Acts of 1935 through 1939, laws prohibiting arms sales and loans to nations at war. The acts were a direct legislative response to documented evidence that financial interests had compromised American foreign policy and dragged the country into a world war to protect bank profits. Those same laws are now regarded by historians as having delayed America's response to Hitler and enabled the growth of the Nazi military machine, while Germany rearmed, invaded its neighbors, and built the concentration camps. America's hands were tied by laws designed to prevent the financial manipulation that had caused the previous war. The cure for one financial catastrophe became the enabler of the next. But the Nye Committee never finished its work. In early 1936, Senator Nye suggested that President Woodrow Wilson had deliberately withheld information from Congress before the 1917 declaration of war. The accusation crossed a political line. Democrats were outraged. The Senate cut the committee's funding. The investigation ended abruptly. The financial connections between Wall Street and both world wars had been documented in 93 hearings with 200 witnesses. And then the file was closed. The questions that remained unanswered in 1936 have never been reopened by any subsequent congressional investigation. The most extraordinary chapter of this story happened after the war ended. American corporations that had operated factories inside Nazi Germany, factories that had produced trucks, aircraft engines, and military equipment for the Wehrmacht, factories that had in some cases used forced labor from concentration camps, filed claims with the United States government for compensation. They did not claim compensation for the damage done by the Nazi regime. They claimed compensation for the damage done by Allied bombs. General Motors collected more than $33 million in reparations and federal tax benefits for bomb damage to its German and Austrian plants. The same plants that had produced thousands of bomber and jet fighter propulsion systems for the Luftwaffe. The same plants that had built military trucks used in the invasion of Poland and France and the Soviet Union. American taxpayers compensated General Motors for the Allied destruction of factories that had been building weapons for the enemy. There are reports, documented by multiple historians including Charles Hyam, that Allied pilots were given instructions not to target factories in Germany that were owned by American firms. Cologne was nearly leveled by Allied bombing. Ford's plant in Cologne, which had been producing military equipment for the Nazi army, survived largely intact. German civilians began using the Ford plant as an air raid shelter because they knew it would not be hit. Ford went before the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission in 1965 to request $7 million in additional compensation for bomb damage to its Cologne plant, the same plant that a U.S. Army intelligence report had called an arsenal of Nazism. The commission awarded Ford approximately $1.1 million. The Nazi government had already paid Ford $104,000 in compensation during the war, while the war was still being fought. The Vichy government had paid additional compensation for bombing damage to Ford's French operations, the Poissy plant that had been producing trucks for the Wehrmacht. After Britain's Royal Air Force bombed the Poissy plant 4 times, the Nazis awarded Ford 38 million francs in compensation, an American compensated by the Nazi government for Allied damage to factories producing Nazi weapons. ITT collected $27 million from the U.S. government for Allied bomb damage to its German plants, the same facilities that had been manufacturing components for Focke-Wulf fighter planes that were shooting down Allied aircraft. American pilots risked their lives and many died dropping bombs on these factories. And after the war, their own government compensated the companies that had been operating those factories for the enemy. Not a single executive of Ford, General Motors, IBM, Standard Oil, or ITT was prosecuted for trading with the enemy. No criminal charges were filed. No trials were held. The Trading with the Enemy Act, the same law that had been used to seize Prescott Bush's Union Banking Corporation assets in 1942, was never applied to any of these far larger corporate operations. Henry Ford had accepted the Grand Cross of the German Eagle from Hitler in 1938. He never returned it. James Mooney of General Motors had accepted the same decoration. He never returned it. These men received Nazi medals for their contributions to the regime and kept them in their homes after the war while American families buried their sons. The executives who had accepted Nazi medals kept them. The companies that had used slave labor, including prisoners from concentration camps, paid into voluntary settlement funds decades later. Not under criminal prosecution, not under court order. Voluntarily, as a public relations exercise. And the factories were rebuilt. many with American Reconstruction money under the Marshall Plan, and resumed commercial production for the same parent companies that had converted them to weapons manufacture a decade earlier. The circle closed. American money built the factories. The factories built Nazi weapons. Allied bombs destroyed the factories. American money rebuilt them. And the companies collected compensation at every stage. There's one more piece of this story that almost no one has ever been taught. A banking family that funded both sides of the war and built a $250 billion empire that still controls a third of Sweden's economy today. The Wallenberg family of Sweden is one of the most powerful financial dynasties in European history. Their investment company, Investor AB, holds controlling stakes in Ericsson, AstraZeneca, ABB, Saab, Electrolux, and Atlas Copco. Their combined empire is valued at approximately 250 billion euros. In the 1970s, their businesses employed 40% of Sweden's industrial workforce. Their family motto is Latin, esse non videre, to be rather than to seem. During the Second World War, the Wallenbergs operated on both sides of the conflict simultaneously. Their bank, Stockholm's Enskilde Bank, handled financial transactions for Nazi Germany while maintaining relationships with the Allied powers. Sweden's neutrality provided the legal framework. The Wallenberg family provided the financial infrastructure. They traded with Germany in iron ore and ball bearings, critical materials without which the Nazi war machine could not have functioned. Swedish iron ore supplied a significant portion of Germany's steel production. Swedish ball bearings were essential components in virtually every piece of military equipment the Wehrmacht operated, from tanks to aircraft to submarines. The Wallenbergs facilitated the financial transactions that kept these supply chains running throughout the war. At the same time, and through the same bank, they maintained financial relationships with the Allied powers. They handled transactions for British and American interests. They served as intermediaries in negotiations that served both sides. They positioned themselves as indispensable to everyone, which meant that no one could afford to shut them down. Jacob Wallenberg, one of the leading figures of the dynasty during the war, personally met with German officials to maintain the trading relationship. His brother Marcus maintained relationships with the British and Americans. The family divided the work along the same lines as the conflict, one brother for each side. When the war ended, whichever side had won, a Wallenberg would have been standing on the winning side. At the same time, a member of the same family was performing one of the most heroic acts of the entire war. Raoul Wallenberg, a younger relative, was posted as a diplomat to Budapest in 1944. He issued thousands of protective passports to Hungarian Jews, documents that declared the bearer to be under the protection of the Swedish crown. He established safe houses across Budapest that sheltered tens of thousands from deportation. He personally confronted Nazi officers. He climbed on top of deportation trains and handed passports through the doors. He is credited with saving more Jewish lives than any other single individual during the Holocaust. Raoul Wallenberg disappeared after Soviet forces entered Budapest in January 1945. He was taken into Soviet custody and never returned. The Soviet government claimed for decades that he had died in captivity. His fate remains one of the great unresolved mysteries of the war. The same family, the same war. One branch financing the machine that was killing millions. Another branch rescuing tens of thousands from that same machine. Both operating simultaneously, neither interfering with the other. After the war, the Wallenbergs faced no prosecution. Their banking empire expanded. Their industrial holdings grew into the largest private economic force in Scandinavian history. They do not appear on public rich lists because their wealth is held in foundations, structures that avoid inheritance taxes and ensure no single family member can access the fortune directly. Their family motto tells you everything, esse non videre, to be rather than to seem. Their empire today controls stakes in companies worth more than 250 billion euros, placing the family's economic power in the same league as the world's wealthiest individuals. Yet almost no one outside Sweden has heard their name. It was built during the war. It was built by playing both sides. And it has never been publicly investigated. What makes this story different from a theory is that every piece of it sits in an archive waiting to be read. The Nye Committee hearings, 93 sessions of testimony, are preserved in the Senate archives. The Dawes report is a published document. The loan figures, 44.7 billion marks in, 16.8 billion out, are in the records of the Allied Reparations Commission. Ambassador Dodd's letter to Roosevelt naming 100 American corporations operating in Nazi Germany is in the presidential archives. The U.S. Army intelligence report calling Ford Work an arsenal of Nazism is declassified and available. The Foreign Claims Settlement Commission records documenting GM's $33 million compensation and Ford's $7 million claim are public. The BIS annual reports from 1940 through 1945 document the gold transactions. The Morgenthau diaries document the Secretary of the Treasury's attempts to shut the bank down. The Bretton Woods resolution to dissolve the BIS is in the conference record. The fact that it was never carried out is in every annual report since. Thomas McKittrick's OSS code name, 644, is in the declassified intelligence files. His post-war appointment to Chase National Bank is in the public record. The compensation payments to GM, Ford, and ITT are documented in congressional records and in Charles Hyam's Trading with the Enemy, a book based entirely on declassified government documents. Every dollar is accounted for. Every name is on the record. Every transaction is preserved. World War II was not simply a battle between good and evil. It was a financial architecture, built over 2 decades, funded by the same institutions on both sides, operated through banks that declared themselves neutral while laundering the gold of the dead, and protected after the war by the same governments that had sent their soldiers to fight it. The Treaty of Versailles created an unpayable debt. The Dawes Plan turned that debt into a circular money machine. The crash of 1929 collapsed the machine. The collapse delivered Germany to a fascist regime. American corporations supplied that regime with trucks, technology, fuel, and financing. A Swiss bank laundered its gold. A Swedish family profited from both sides. And when it was over, the bankers were promoted, the corporations were compensated, and the families that played both sides built empires that still stand today. 60 million people died in that war. The men who financed it into existence were not punished. They were promoted. That is not a theory. That is a paper trail. If this connected something you were never taught in any classroom, that is exactly what this channel exists to do. Every video on this channel follows the money through the primary source archive. Subscribe if you follow the paper trail. And if you made it this far, leave the word financed in the comments so I know who stayed for the full story.